Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2019 Advanced. In this section, we're going to start to look at functions, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time looking at functions as they really do form the backbone of pretty much everything that we do in Excel. Now, functions have been very much the main strength of Excel since the beginning. In Excel 2019, the number of available functions has just about passed the 400 mark, and I can assure you, don't worry, we're not going to be looking at all of them in this course, but we are going to look at quite a few of them. And really, I guess the main problem with functions is the sheer number of them, in that even if you have an idea of the function you want to use, you might not know what it's called or be able to identify easily. So in this first section, I'm going to cover a few of the basics of functions that you might be familiar with, but I'm also going to try to extend that into areas that you may not have used or seen before. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about how you find what you need and how to identify not only what it does, but how to use it. The first thing I'm going to point out is that there is a really good help topic on functions in Excel 2019 that's a pretty good reference point to find out all the information you need about functions. And here is that help topic, Excel functions by category. Let's go into a particular category like logical functions. And within the list of logical functions, some of the functions have a little year number underneath them. So for example, you can see the if-s function is only available in Excel 2016. If you drill down a bit further into the function by clicking, you'll find a description of what the function does. There will also be some technical details that includes information about the arguments, which ones are required and optional, information about the data types, and so on, and then generally one or more examples of the use of that function. You also get at the bottom sometimes some common problems that you might encounter and typical errors that you get an explanation as to how to correct those errors that may have occurred. So this is all very useful if you're looking for a little bit more information about a specific function. Now, something that isn't mentioned here but is important is that some of the functions in Excel have been improved or advanced, and in some cases give what is usually more accurate results than they used to. So if you have any legacy systems based on Excel or macros, you might find that the results are more accurate than they used to be. There are some other useful links towards the bottom of this page, but there's also a link here to the Excel functions listed in alphabetical order. And there they are. And a couple of other things worth bearing in mind is that you can buy or sometimes get for free functions from third parties. Of course, you could always write your own. Both of these are outside the scope of this course, but are well worth bearing in mind for future reference. What I'm going to do now is a very quick demo of a simple function, and I'm going to point out some of the key features that you're probably familiar with, but possibly a couple of things that you're also not familiar with. So let's start out with a very simple job and just add up these four numbers. If I want to total some numbers, as I do here, I can enter a formula anywhere on this sheet. On this occasion, I'm going to write it directly under the list of four numbers. I start with an equal sign, and I'm going to use the sum function. Now, if I hit S, it's going to give me a list of all the functions that begin with S. Now, if I hit U, it narrows that list down to all of the functions that begin with SU. And of course, the one I want on this occasion is sum. So I'm going to select it by double clicking. And you'll see that not only do I get the rest of the name of the function, but I get the first parentheses. And within the parentheses, I'm going to need to enter some arguments. And in the list of arguments, you'll see the bold arguments are mandatory, so I must have at least one number in here. And then the non-bold arguments indicated also here by square brackets are optional arguments. As you can see in the standard definition of the sum function, the arguments are also separated by commas. So whatever the function, even in functions that have no arguments, you'll need to use parentheses. And we'll look at an example of that in a moment. In those arguments, I don't have to put cell references. I could put actual constants. So I could put, for example, sum, and then I could type a 6. And then when I put a comma in, you'll see that Excel is telling me that the next argument is mandatory as it's highlighted in bold. I could then add 8, comma, 10, so on and so forth. And it continues until I close those parentheses. When I've finished entering the argument, I can either hit enter or I can tick the tick on the formula bar. And I'm going to hit the enter key. And I have my total there of 23. The way I have Excel set up is when I hit the enter key, the cursor moves down to the cell below the one where I've just entered the formula. And now you can see the full formula in the formula bar using the sum function and constants. If instead of using constants for the argument, I want to use cell references, so I want to sum the contents of cell D2, D3, D4, and D5, I can use those cell references instead of the constants. So I could enter my formula equals sum, open bracket, select the first cell reference, comma, second cell reference, comma, third cell reference, comma, and then finally, and it's underneath there, the last cell reference, close the parentheses and hit the enter key to give me an answer of 75. So listing the cell references is one possibility. The other possibility, of course, is to specify a range. So instead of listing all of those cells separated by a comma, I could use a range of cells instead. And the way that you can indicate a range is by using a colon between the start cell in the range and the end cell in the range. So let's do this formula again. I'm going to delete it out. And this time we're going to use the range. So equals sum, open bracket, and I'm just going to drag my mouse down to select the range. Oh, hang on, I think I've gone one too far there. So I'm going to make a quick edit, D5, close my parentheses, and hit enter, and I get the same result. Now, I'm not restricted to using values just on this worksheet alone. I have a second range located on sheet 3. Let's go back to sheet 2, and I'm going to double click, and I'm just going to remove my cell range or delete it out. So what I can do now is jump across to sheet 3 and select the cell range just by highlighting E3 to I3. And then if I hit enter, you'll see I get the total of 68. Let's take a closer look at what exactly that function is doing. So if we double click so we can see it, and you can see it gives the sheet name, so sheet 3. It then gives an exclamation point or a bang, as I like to call them. And then it shows the cell range that we've actually selected that's located on that particular sheet. There is also nothing to stop me adding the values in cell range D2 to D5 on this sheet to the values in the range E3 to I3 on sheet 3, which will give me a big grand total. So I'm going to go up to the formula bar this time to edit. I'm just going to click before where it says sheet 3. I'm then going to highlight cells D2 to D5, put in a comma, and I'm going to click the tick this time instead of hitting enter. And there we go. That gives me a nice answer, all those totals together, of 143. Now, partly because of the flexibility within the use of formulae in Excel, there are rules that you need to stick to, such as you don't have any spaces between function names and parentheses. So if I was just to add one in here by just adding a space and then clicking on the tick to accept it, you'll see that Excel pops up an error. And it says we found a typo in your formula and it's tried to correct it. And I can just double check to make sure that it's corrected it correctly, which in this case it has. And Excel's pretty clever like that. It can normally work out most of the time what you're trying to do and provide you with a suitable correction. So I'm going to say yes to accept this correction. And my formula is working again. Now, I mentioned earlier that even if a function has no arguments, you still need to put it in parentheses. So let's look at an example of that. So for example, I want to work out the value of pi. So I'm going to enter in equals, and I'm going to type pi into my cell. And you can see there, I just want to draw your attention to that screen tip that's popped up. So it says returns the value of pi. And then it gives me that value of pi accurate to 15 digits. If I click on the tick, it will produce an error. So in this case, I'm getting a name error. And you should notice a little marker in the corner there to indicate that there is an error. So if I click it and see what my options are, it's picked up that it's invalid name error. I could also go to help on this error, show calculation steps, ignore error, edit it in the formula bar, or I can go and modify my error checking options. Now this formula contains unrecognized text and it's given me a link through to the invalid name error. So I know that there is a problem with the name. So let's go and edit it in the formula bar. So I'm going to click up here and this is where I need to add my empty parentheses. So I'm going to add them in like so. And now when I click on the tick, you can see that that formula is now working and it's accurate specifically to the format of that particular cell. The other thing to bear in mind is that you can also nest functions. So if I wanted to add the value of pi to the sum of my numbers over here, I could do that. So I'm going to go up to the formula bar again and I'm just going to click within my formula at the end there. I'm going to add comma. I'm going to add pi and I'm going to do my parentheses. And remember, when closing off parentheses, you always need to close as many as you've opened. And now when I hit enter, I have my new total of 146.142. And I could change that by just taking down the decimal places or increasing those decimal places if I wanted to. One other feature which you may have noticed is the use of color coding to make it easier to identify arguments on a worksheet. In this case, it won't be particularly helpful, but later on in some of the case studies, this color coding can make your life so much easier. So let's take a look at it. I'm just going to double click in my cell and I'm actually going to remove the majority of what I've put in here. Just delete that out. And I'm going to type the cell reference D2. And you'll see it highlights it. So we have a dark blue border with some blue shading. If I do comma D3, you'll see it highlights the next one and it highlights it in the formula that you're typing and on the actual worksheet. And it will carry on. If I type in D4, we get a highlight in a different color. In the next section, we're going to continue to look at functions in general, but focus on some of the more sophisticated utilities, such as the use of the functions dialog box. So I will meet you there.